Just 24 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, U-1206 represented the pinnacle of German submarine technology. Launched in December 1943 at the Schichau-Werke shipyard in Danzig and commissioned in March 1944, this vessel embodied everything German naval engineers believed would deliver victory in the underwater war. Advanced hydrophone arrays, precision periscopes, sophisticated torpedo guidance systems, and state-of-the-art diesel engines throughout. But hidden in the forward compartment was Germany's most dangerous innovation, the Druckspülungsanlage, a high-pressure toilet designed to flush waste directly into the ocean while submerged at significant depth. The submarine warfare of World War II had evolved into a deadly game of cat and mouse by 1945. German U-boats, once the terror of the Atlantic shipping lanes, now faced overwhelming Allied countermeasures. Advanced radar systems could detect surfaced submarines from dozens of miles away. Improved sonar tracked submerged vessels with unprecedented accuracy. Long-range aircraft patrolled vast areas of ocean, armed with depth charges and homing torpedoes. The happy hunting grounds of 1942 had become death traps, where experienced submarine crews measured their survival in days rather than months. Against this backdrop of technological warfare, German engineers had convinced themselves that superior engineering could overcome Allied numerical advantages. Unlike British and American submarines that used simple holding tanks for waste management, this German system promised to save precious space and weight while eliminating the dangerous necessity of surfacing to empty septic tanks. German naval architects had calculated that removing traditional waste storage systems would allow each submarine to carry 2 additional torpedoes and extend underwater endurance by eliminating the need for regular waste disposal surfacing. The mathematics appeared compelling. The engineering seemed elegant. The strategic advantages looked decisive. The reality would prove utterly catastrophic in ways that perfectly captured everything wrong with German wartime technology philosophy. The development of submarine toilet technology reveals the fundamental difference between German and Allied approaches to engineering problems. Traditional submarine waste management had always been crude but effective. Sailors used toilets connected to holding tanks that were pumped overboard when the vessel surfaced. The system was unglamorous, space-consuming, and completely reliable. It required no special training, involved no complex procedures, and could not catastrophically flood the submarine regardless of operator competence. German engineers, however, saw opportunity for improvement where others saw adequate functionality. They designed a sophisticated high-pressure system that could discharge waste directly into the sea while the submarine remained submerged. The theoretical advantages were undeniable: reduced weight, increased torpedo capacity, longer submerged endurance, and elimination of vulnerable surfacing requirements for waste disposal. The engineering challenges were formidable. Ocean pressure at operational depths far exceeded any pressure that gravity-fed systems could overcome. The solution required multiple pressurized chambers, precision valves, complex timing sequences, and constant monitoring of pressure differentials. The system demanded specialized training for safe operation and perfect execution of intricate procedures. Any mistake in valve operation could result in high-pressure seawater flooding back into the submarine with potentially catastrophic results. Schlit made his way forward through the cramped submarine interior to where Germany's technological pride awaited. The high-pressure toilet system represented months of engineering work by some of the Reich's most talented naval architects and mechanical engineers. The apparatus featured a complex series of pressurized chambers, precision-manufactured valves, and intricate controls that could theoretically discharge waste directly into the sea, even at depths where water pressure exceeded 100 pounds per square inch. Every valve had to be operated in exact sequence according to detailed written procedures. Every pressure differential had to be carefully monitored using specialized gauges. Every step required specific training that few submariners possessed, and fewer still had mastered under the stress of actual combat conditions. The system represented German engineering at its most sophisticated, theoretically superior, mechanically complex, and practically fragile. Each German submarine equipped with this advanced waste management system carried a specially trained operator whose primary responsibility was ensuring safe toilet operation under all conditions. These specialists underwent weeks of training on the complex procedures required for safe system operation. They memorized valve sequences, pressure requirements, timing intervals, and emergency procedures for system failures. The normal operating procedure involved multiple stages of careful pressurization, precise valve manipulation, and exact timing coordination. First, the waste chamber had to be isolated and pressurized to match external water pressure. Then, a series of valves had to be opened in specific sequence to create the pressure differential needed for discharge. Finally, the system had to be depressurized and reset for the next user. Get any step wrong, and seawater could rush backward into the submarine with tremendous force. The system worked flawlessly under ideal conditions with properly trained personnel following correct procedures. Those conditions, however, were increasingly rare in April 1945. German submarines were crewed by hastily trained recruits, exhausted veterans, and foreign volunteers of varying competence. The specialists who understood complex systems were often killed in action or transferred to other desperate assignments. The submarines that did reach operational status frequently operated with incomplete crews using equipment they barely understood. Captain Schlit completed his biological necessities and reached for the controls that would initiate the sophisticated disposal sequence. Instead of summoning the trained specialist as regulations required, he decided to operate the mechanism himself. How complicated could waste disposal possibly be? He was, after all, commanding one of Germany's most technologically advanced submarines. Surely a submarine captain could master a toilet system, regardless of its complexity. He examined the bewildering array of valves, pressure gauges, and control mechanisms that surrounded the toilet. The written procedures were posted nearby, but they seemed unnecessarily complex for what should be a straightforward operation. Multiple pages of detailed instructions for flushing a toilet struck him as typical German over-engineering. He had more pressing concerns than memorizing waste disposal procedures. The first valve seemed obvious enough based on its position and markings. He turned it confidently, expecting immediate results. Nothing happened. The system remained inert, showing no response to his input. He tried another valve combination, reasoning that the sequence might be different from what he expected. Still nothing. The sophisticated German engineering refused to respond to his untrained manipulation. Growing frustrated with the unresponsive system, Schlit began experimenting with multiple controls simultaneously. His confidence gradually transformed into confusion as the supposedly superior German technology proved impossible to operate without specialized knowledge. Each attempted combination of valve positions yielded the same disappointing result: nothing. The toilet remained stubbornly non-functional despite his increasingly desperate efforts. Pride finally yielding to practical necessity, Schlit abandoned his attempts at independent operation and called for assistance from the designated specialist. A crewman hurried forward to help his captain with the recalcitrant waste disposal system. But in his embarrassment at requiring help with a toilet, Schlit provided unclear and incomplete information about which valves he had already manipulated and in what sequence. The specialist, eager to help his commanding officer quickly and restore normal system function, attempted to assess the current state of the complex mechanism. Based on Schlit's confused explanation and his own visual inspection of valve positions, he made what seemed like reasonable assumptions about how to restore the system to proper operating condition. He opened what he believed was the appropriate valve to complete the disposal sequence. The result was immediate, spectacular, and utterly devastating. Instead of waste flowing outward into the ocean as designed, the North Sea rushed inward with tremendous force. High-pressure seawater, contaminated with the toilet's contents, erupted into the submarine's forward compartment, like a malevolent geyser. The sophisticated German system, designed for precision operation under exact conditions, had become a deadly water cannon aimed directly at the submarine's interior. The physics of the failure were catastrophic. At 200 feet depth, water pressure exceeded 100 pounds per square inch. When the specialist opened the wrong valve, he created a direct pathway for that pressurized seawater to enter the submarine. The complex system that was supposed to overcome ocean pressure had instead channeled that pressure directly into the vessel's hull. Gallons of contaminated seawater cascaded through the forward section with unstoppable force. The flooding spread rapidly through deck plates, cable runs, and bulkhead penetrations, threatening to overwhelm the entire forward compartment. Schlit watched in mounting horror as his technological marvel began systematically destroying itself from within its own bathroom facilities. The most advanced submarine toilet in the world had become an instrument of self-destruction. The contaminated water poured relentlessly into the battery compartment located directly below the toilet area. German submarines carried massive lead-acid battery banks that provided electrical power for submerged operations. These batteries contained concentrated sulfuric acid that was essential for electrical generation, but became deadly when mixed with seawater. When the flooding reached these batteries, it initiated a violent chemical reaction that began generating clouds of chlorine gas. The chemistry was as predictable as it was lethal. Seawater contains sodium chloride, common salt. When salt water contacts sulfuric acid under electrical conditions, it produces chlorine gas through electrolysis. The same process used in chemical plants to manufacture chlorine for industrial purposes was now occurring uncontrolled in the submarine's battery compartment. Yellow-green clouds of poisonous vapor began rising through the submarine's ventilation systems. Chlorine gas had been used as a chemical weapon during World War I with horrific effectiveness. Even in small concentrations, it caused severe respiratory irritation, chemical burns to the lungs, and potentially fatal pulmonary edema. In the confined space of a submarine, with limited ventilation and no possibility of escape, chlorine gas posed an immediate threat to every man aboard. The crew donned emergency breathing equipment and retreated toward the stern as the lethal vapor spread through the forward compartments. Within minutes of the toilet malfunction, the sophisticated submarine was simultaneously flooding with seawater and filling with poison gas. The most advanced technology had created the most dangerous possible combination of threats. German engineering excellence had produced a system so complex that a single operational error could trigger multiple catastrophic failures simultaneously. Schlit faced an impossible choice that perfectly captured the dilemma facing Germany in 1945. Remain submerged and risk death from chlorine poisoning, or surface and face certain discovery by Allied aircraft that maintained constant patrol over the North Sea. With his crew's lives hanging in the balance and toxic gas spreading throughout his command, he ordered emergency surface procedures. The submarine's ballast tanks were blown, and all torpedoes were fired to reduce weight and improve buoyancy. The decision to surface represented everything wrong with German strategic thinking in the final years of the war. Complex systems had created problems that required dangerous solutions. The pursuit of technological sophistication had eliminated safe alternatives. German engineers had designed equipment that worked perfectly under ideal conditions, but offered no graceful failure modes when those conditions disappeared. U-1206 rocketed toward the surface through the dark waters, trailing clouds of toxic vapor through its snorkel and ventilation systems. The sophisticated submarine that had required over a year to design and construct was being destroyed by its own bathroom in less than an hour. German engineering excellence had created a system so intricate that improper operation could sink the entire vessel faster than enemy action. Breaking the surface in a dramatic spray of seawater and poison gas, U-1206 immediately attracted the attention it had desperately tried to avoid. The submarine emerged directly beneath a Royal Air Force coastal patrol that had been systematically hunting German submarines throughout the North Sea. Allied radar had detected the emergency surfacing, and aircraft were already converging on the location. The Royal Air Force had perfected anti-submarine tactics through 4 years of intensive warfare. Coastal command squadrons maintained constant patrols over shipping lanes and submarine transit routes. Aircraft carried radar equipment that could detect surfaced submarines from dozens of miles away. When contact was established, multiple aircraft would converge on the target to prevent escape through diving. A Royal Air Force patrol spotted the submarine immediately and began their attack run with practiced efficiency. Machine gun bullets stitched across the submarine's deck as the crew frantically worked to vent chlorine gas from their vessel, while simultaneously preparing defensive measures. The aircraft's guns targeted the submarine's anti-aircraft weapons, conning tower, and deck equipment with devastating accuracy. The irony was complete. German technological sophistication had delivered the submarine directly into the hands of Allied forces using practical, reliable equipment. The sophisticated toilet system had forced the submarine to surface, where simple aircraft with basic weapons could destroy it easily. Complex German engineering had been defeated by straightforward Allied tactics employing proven technology. The aircraft's guns found their mark with deadly precision. One crewman was killed instantly as bullets tore through the submarine's conning tower and deck areas. The vessel, unable to dive due to extensive flooding and mechanical damage from the toilet catastrophe, lay helpless under sustained aerial assault. German technological superiority had become German technological vulnerability in a matter of minutes. Additional aircraft arrived as word of the surfaced submarine spread through Allied communication networks. The submarine faced overwhelming firepower from multiple directions with no possibility of escape through diving. The sophisticated systems that were supposed to provide tactical advantages had instead eliminated all tactical options. German engineering had created a perfect trap for its own forces. Faced with certain destruction and the imminent capture of his submarine, Captain Schlit made the most difficult decision of his naval career. He ordered the crew to abandon ship and initiated scuttling procedures to prevent the submarine from falling into British hands. The sophisticated U-boat that had carried Germany's highest technological hopes was being deliberately destroyed by its own commander to prevent intelligence capture. The scuttling of U-1206 represented far more than the loss of a single submarine. It symbolized the failure of German technological philosophy in the face of practical Allied engineering. The most advanced submarine toilet in the world had doomed one of Germany's most sophisticated warships. Complex systems requiring perfect operation had been defeated by simple systems that worked consistently under any conditions. The crew launched emergency dinghies and began their desperate escape toward the Scottish coastline through heavy seas that made evacuation extremely treacherous. The same North Sea that had provided concealment for their submarine now threatened to claim their lives as they struggled to reach shore in overcrowded life rafts. As they rode through rough waters with Allied aircraft circling overhead, tragedy struck again. 3 crew members drowned when their overcrowded dinghy capsized in the rough seas. Hans Berkauer, Karl Koren, and Emil Cooper perished within sight of the Scottish shore. These men had survived the toilet catastrophe, the chlorine gas poisoning, and the aerial attack, only to die during the evacuation. They became the final victims of the sophisticated toilet system that had doomed their submarine and ended their naval careers. The deaths of these 3 sailors completed the tragedy begun by German over-engineering. Men who had trained for years to operate sophisticated equipment died because that same equipment had created an impossible situation. The pursuit of technological perfection had produced practical disaster. The most advanced systems had generated the most basic problems: flooding, poisoning, and death. What Captain Schlit could not have known, floating in his rubber dinghy and watching U-1206 disappear beneath the waves for the final time, was that his toilet catastrophe perfectly symbolized why Germany was losing the war on every front. The very sophistication that German engineers celebrated as proof of their technical superiority had become a fatal weakness that Allied forces exploited with devastating effectiveness. The contrast with Allied submarine design philosophy could not have been more striking or more revealing. British and American submarines used simple gravity-fed waste management systems that emptied into conventional holding tanks. When nature called, Allied submariners used straightforward toilets that operated essentially like their counterparts on land. The waste collected in septic tanks that were pumped overboard when the submarine surfaced during routine operations. This Allied approach to submarine sanitation was admittedly crude, unglamorous, and space-consuming. It required substantial internal volume for waste storage, added significant weight to the submarine, and necessitated regular surfacing for tank emptying. From a pure engineering perspective, it represented an inelegant solution to a technical problem that German engineers believed they had solved definitively. However, the Allied system possessed one overwhelming advantage that trumped all theoretical superiority. It was completely reliable under any conceivable operating conditions. It required no special training beyond basic familiarity with valve operation. It involved no complex procedures that could be forgotten under stress. It demanded no precision timing that could be disrupted by combat conditions. Most importantly, it could not catastrophically flood the submarine regardless of operator competence or incompetence. Any sailor in the Allied navies could use these facilities safely, regardless of training level, stress conditions, or combat experience. The system worked equally well whether operated by experienced veterans or nervous recruits. It functioned normally during depth charge attacks, aerial bombardments, or any other crisis situation. The simple gravity-fed design could not fail in ways that threatened the submarine's survival. The philosophical difference between German and Allied engineering approaches revealed everything about the fundamental military strategies that would ultimately determine the conflict's outcome. German engineers pursued theoretical perfection in individual systems, creating technology that delivered superior performance under ideal conditions. Allied engineers prioritized practical reliability across entire systems, building technology that functioned adequately under the worst possible circumstances. This contrast extended far beyond submarine sanitation into every aspect of military technology development. German Tiger tanks featured sophisticated transmission systems, complex mechanical components, and precision manufacturing tolerances that delivered unmatched battlefield performance when everything worked perfectly. They also broke down frequently, required specialized maintenance procedures, and proved nearly impossible to repair under combat conditions in the field. American Sherman tanks, by comparison, were mechanically simpler and less individually sophisticated. They could be maintained by any reasonably competent mechanic using standard tools and readily available replacement parts. When damaged, they could often continue fighting with reduced capability. When destroyed completely, they could be quickly replaced by mass production techniques that Germany could never match with its precision manufacturing philosophy. The reliability difference was decisive in sustained combat operations. German tanks might win individual engagements when they functioned properly, but Allied tanks won entire campaigns by remaining operational when German vehicles broke down. Simple systems that worked consistently outperformed sophisticated systems that worked perfectly but infrequently. Practical engineering defeated theoretical engineering through sheer persistence. German aircraft demonstrated exactly the same problematic pattern. Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf fighters featured complex fuel injection systems, sophisticated supercharging mechanisms, and precision-engineered components that delivered exceptional performance characteristics under perfect maintenance conditions. They also required expert technical support, specialized replacement parts, and ideal operating environments that became increasingly unavailable as the war progressed. Allied aircraft employed simpler carburetors, basic supercharging systems, and robust components that continued functioning effectively even when maintained by inexperienced ground crews using improvised tools and substitute materials. They were individually less elegant, but collectively far more reliable under actual combat conditions, where perfection was impossible and consistency was essential. The maintenance requirements revealed the fundamental flaw in German engineering philosophy. German aircraft required highly trained technicians, specialized tools, precision parts, and controlled environments. Allied aircraft could be maintained by minimally trained personnel using basic equipment, improvised parts, and field conditions. When German technical expertise was killed or captured, aircraft became unflyable. When Allied maintenance personnel were lost, others could substitute immediately. The German submarine service had recognized the reliability problem plaguing their technology, but had chosen precisely the wrong solution. Instead of simplifying their designs to improve reliability, they doubled down on complexity while training specialists to operate increasingly sophisticated equipment. Every German submarine carried technical experts for toilets, periscopes, sonar equipment, torpedo systems, and dozens of other specialized systems requiring dedicated expertise. This specialization created multiple points of failure in submarine operations. When the toilet specialist was killed, injured, or transferred, toilet operations became dangerous. When the periscope specialist was unavailable, navigation became problematic. When any technical expert was missing, the corresponding system became unreliable or unusable. German submarines required perfect crews operating perfect equipment under perfect conditions. Allied submarines took the deliberately opposite approach to crew training and system design. They trained entire crews to perform multiple functions, ensuring that any sailor could operate essential systems with reasonable competence. Cross-training and deliberate simplification meant that equipment failures rarely rendered the submarine helpless or dangerous. When specialists were killed or wounded in action, others could immediately step in to maintain operations. The training philosophy difference was as important as the technology difference. German submarines depended on irreplaceable specialists who required months of training on complex systems. Allied submarines used replaceable generalists who could learn essential functions in weeks. German submarines became less effective as experienced personnel were lost. Allied submarines maintained effectiveness despite personnel changes because systems were designed for operation by ordinary sailors. By April 1945, when U-1206 met its embarrassing and tragic fate, the German submarine force was in terminal decline that reflected the broader collapse of German technological strategy. The statistics told a comprehensive story of systematic destruction and institutional failure. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in the Kriegsmarine submarine force during World War II, over 30,000 were already dead, missing, or captured. The casualty rate among German submariners exceeded 75%, making submarine duty the most dangerous assignment in the entire German military structure. Even elite Waffen-SS units operating on the Eastern Front against Soviet forces suffered lower casualty rates than submarine crews. The underwater war had become a death sentence for most participants, with survival measured in patrols rather than years. New submarines were being sunk faster than German shipyards could construct replacements, despite desperate efforts to accelerate production through forced labor and resource concentration. Experienced crews had become increasingly rare as veteran submariners were killed in action, transferred to other critical assignments, or simply refused additional submarine duty after surviving multiple patrols. The submarines that did manage to reach operational status were often manned by hastily trained crews operating complex equipment they barely understood. Training programs had been compressed from months to weeks due to desperate personnel shortages. New crew members were sent to operational submarines with minimal experience on sophisticated systems they had never seen before their first combat patrol. The contrast with 1940, when German submarines had terrorized Allied shipping with apparent impunity, could not have been more dramatic. Early war submarine crews were experienced, well-trained, and confident in their equipment. They operated in waters where Allied countermeasures were primitive and ineffective. German technological advantages were decisive when combined with superior training and favorable strategic conditions. By 1945, all of those advantages had disappeared or been reversed. Allied countermeasures had become sophisticated and effective. German training had become abbreviated and inadequate. Strategic conditions heavily favored Allied forces who controlled most ocean areas and maintained constant anti-submarine patrols. German technological complexity had become a liability rather than an asset. The Allied response to submarine warfare demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of practical engineering philosophy over theoretical sophistication in sustained military operations. Instead of attempting to build superior submarines to hunt German submarines in underwater combat, the Allies concentrated on mass-producing simple escort vessels that could be constructed quickly and operated by minimally trained crews with basic equipment. This strategic approach recognized that submarine warfare was fundamentally about numbers, persistence, and reliability, rather than individual technical superiority. The side that could maintain more ships at sea for longer periods with more reliable crews would ultimately control the ocean lanes. Complex individual systems were less important than simple systems that worked consistently across large numbers of vessels. Destroyer escorts represented floating embodiments of Allied design philosophy applied to naval warfare. These vessels featured uncomplicated steam propulsion instead of complex diesel systems, basic radar equipment instead of sophisticated detection arrays, and straightforward weapons systems that any sailor could operate effectively with minimal specialized training. They were deliberately unglamorous, intentionally unsophisticated, and incredibly effective at their primary mission of submarine destruction. The engineering choices were conscious and systematic. Steam engines were less efficient than diesel engines, but far more reliable and easier to maintain. Basic radar was less capable than advanced radar, but much more dependable and simpler to repair. Standard weapons were less sophisticated than precision weapons, but could be operated by ordinary sailors under combat stress without specialized training. These simple warships proved far more dangerous to German submarines than any technological marvel could have been. A basic destroyer escort with standard sonar equipment and mass-produced depth charges could locate and sink the most sophisticated German submarine with its advanced periscopes, precision torpedo systems, and complex machinery. The submarine that required 18 months to design and construct could be destroyed in 18 minutes by a ship built in 6 weeks. The production mathematics were decisive. Allied shipyards could build escort vessels faster than German shipyards could build submarines. Allied training programs could produce competent crews faster than German programs could produce specialists. Allied logistics could maintain more ships at sea for longer periods than German logistics could support submarine operations. Simple systems scaled better than complex systems. German submariners learned through increasingly bitter experience that Allied primitive technology was far more lethal than German sophistication in actual combat conditions. Simple systems worked consistently under combat stress when complex systems failed catastrophically. Reliable equipment operated effectively when sophisticated equipment became unreliable. Practical solutions outlasted theoretical solutions in sustained operations. The lesson was written in blood across the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. Complex German submarines were being systematically destroyed by simple Allied escort vessels using basic tactics and proven equipment. Sophisticated technology requiring perfect conditions was being defeated by reliable technology that worked under any conditions. The pursuit of individual excellence was losing to the achievement of collective competence. Word of U-1206's toilet disaster spread rapidly throughout the German submarine community, despite official attempts at maintaining secrecy about embarrassing losses. Military censorship could suppress news reports and official communications, but could not prevent stories from circulating among submarine crews who knew each other personally and shared information through informal networks. The story became dark gallows humor among crews already demoralized by massive casualties, dwindling resources, and increasingly hopeless strategic situations. Submarine veterans shared the tale as an example of everything wrong with German engineering philosophy and military leadership. The most advanced submarine in the fleet had been destroyed by its own toilet, confirming suspicions that German technology was becoming too complex for practical military use. Submarine commanders throughout the remaining German fleet began requesting modifications to remove complex toilet systems and install older septic tank designs, abandoning German engineering pride for Allied-style practicality. The requests were usually denied due to resource constraints and engineering bureaucracy, but the fact that combat commanders preferred enemy-style equipment to German equipment was deeply significant. The psychological impact of the U-1206 incident was devastating to German submarine morale. If Germany's most advanced submarines could be destroyed by their own toilets, what hope remained for victory against Allied forces who seemed to possess unlimited resources and increasingly effective countermeasures? The incident symbolized everything wrong with German technological philosophy. Brilliant solutions that worked perfectly until they failed catastrophically. The broader implications extended far beyond submarine warfare into fundamental questions about German military strategy and industrial philosophy. The pursuit of technological superiority through complex engineering had become self-defeating when that complexity created more problems than it solved. The most advanced systems had become the most unreliable systems when operated under real-world conditions by real-world personnel. British naval intelligence officers who interrogated U-1206 survivors were genuinely astounded by the complexity of the German toilet system and the training requirements for safe operation. Royal Navy submarine commanders requested detailed technical drawings and operational manuals, not to copy the design for British use, but to understand what engineering mistakes to avoid in future submarine development. The British Submarine Service distributed the U-1206 story throughout their design and training organizations as a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-engineering military equipment. The incident became a standard example used in engineering courses to illustrate why simplicity and reliability were more important than sophistication and theoretical performance in military applications. The fundamental lesson was elegantly simple: keep systems as uncomplicated as practically possible. Complex solutions might deliver better performance under perfect conditions, but warfare never provided perfect conditions for extended periods. Stress, fatigue, combat damage, and personnel inexperience were constants that had to be accommodated in system design from the beginning. Military equipment had to be designed for operation by frightened, exhausted, inadequately trained personnel under combat stress, using damaged equipment with substitute materials in chaotic environments. Systems that required perfect conditions, expert operators, and precise procedures were guaranteed to fail when those requirements could not be met. Simplicity was not a compromise, but a requirement for military effectiveness. Captain Karl Adolf Schlit survived his toilet catastrophe and the subsequent aerial attack, spending nearly 3 years as a British prisoner of war in various camps throughout the United Kingdom. Allied interrogators found him generally cooperative and forthcoming about most aspects of submarine operations and German naval technology, though he remained consistently evasive about the specific circumstances surrounding U-1206's loss. Professional military pride made it extremely difficult for Schlit to admit publicly that his submarine had been sunk by improper toilet operation rather than enemy action or mechanical failure. The embarrassment was compounded by the fact that his decision to operate the complex system without proper training had directly caused the catastrophe that killed 4 of his crew members and destroyed his command. British interrogation reports noted that Schlit was knowledgeable about German submarine technology and tactics, but seemed reluctant to discuss equipment reliability problems or training inadequacies. He consistently maintained that German submarines were technically superior to Allied submarines, despite the obvious evidence that superior technology had not prevented his own submarine from being destroyed by its toilet system. After his release from prisoner of war status in February 1948, Schlit returned to a Germany that had been completely transformed by defeat, occupation, and the beginning of the Cold War. The submarine service he had known no longer existed. The technological philosophy he had believed in had been thoroughly discredited. The engineering approaches he had trusted had been abandoned in favor of simpler, more reliable systems. Schlit successfully rebuilt his life in civilian career paths that utilized his leadership experience and technical knowledge. He studied law at the University of Kiel, passed his state legal examinations with distinction, and entered civil administration where his military experience and organizational skills were valued despite his wartime service. He eventually rose to become district administrator for Oldenburg in Holstein, serving with considerable distinction until the regional governmental reorganization of 1970. His civilian career demonstrated that the leadership qualities that had made him a submarine commander could be successfully transferred to peacetime administrative responsibilities. Throughout his post-war life, Schlit remained proud of his submarine service and his crew's courage under impossible circumstances, but he rarely discussed the specific details of U-1206's destruction with historians, journalists, or even family members. When pressed for details about the toilet incident, he consistently maintained that the flooding resulted from mechanical failure rather than operator error. Only near the very end of his life did Schlit begin to acknowledge privately that the toilet incident had taught him valuable lessons about the critical importance of reliable technology over sophisticated technology in high-stress environments. He came to understand that the pursuit of engineering excellence without corresponding attention to practical reliability was ultimately self-defeating. The wreck of U-1206 was discovered in the mid-1970s during comprehensive seabed surveys conducted for the North Sea oil pipeline development projects. The submarine lay in approximately 70 meters of water, 12 miles off the Scottish coast, remarkably well preserved after 3 decades on the ocean floor. Marine archaeologists found the vessel largely intact, a testament to German construction quality even as it served as an underwater monument to flawed design philosophy. When British Petroleum learned the specific identity of the wreck through historical research, they contacted Captain Schlit and arranged for him to visit Scotland in 1987 to meet with survivors of the original rescue efforts. The reunion was arranged as both a humanitarian gesture and a public relations opportunity that emphasized reconciliation between former enemies. Schlit met with crew members of the fishing vessel Reaper, who had rescued some of his men from the North Sea 42 years earlier during their desperate escape from the sinking submarine. The Scottish fishermen had risked their own lives to pull German sailors from rough seas, demonstrating the basic humanity that persisted even during wartime between enemies. The reunion was deeply emotional for all participants. Former enemies shared stories of the war and its aftermath, finding common ground in their shared humanity and mutual respect for seamanship and courage under dangerous conditions. Schlit spoke eloquently about the lessons learned from his wartime experiences, though he remained diplomatically vague about the toilet incident that had originally brought them together. Schlit presented the Scottish fishermen with a commemorative bronze plaque expressing gratitude for their humanitarian actions during wartime. The inscription acknowledged their courage in rescuing enemy sailors at considerable personal risk, demonstrating that human decency could survive even the most bitter conflicts between nations. Karl Adolf Schlit died on April 7, 2009, at the age of 90, just 1 week before the 64th anniversary of his submarine's destruction. He was the last surviving crew member of U-1206, taking many secrets and personal memories of that fateful April day to his grave. His death marked the end of direct personal testimony about one of World War II's most embarrassing military incidents. His widow later revealed in interviews that Schlit had remained proud of his submarine service and his crew's courage throughout his life, while privately acknowledging the technological and tactical mistakes that had cost lives and contributed to Germany's ultimate defeat. He understood that individual courage and technical skill could not overcome fundamental strategic and engineering failures. The toilet that sank U-1206 represents far more than an embarrassing wartime anecdote or historical curiosity. It symbolizes the fundamental difference between German and Allied approaches to technology, engineering, and industrial warfare that ultimately determined the conflict's outcome. The incident encapsulates broader lessons about the relationship between sophistication and reliability in high-stakes technical systems. German designers consistently pursued elegant solutions to complex problems, creating systems that required perfect conditions and flawless operation to achieve their theoretical potential. This approach produced impressive individual achievements and technological breakthroughs that demonstrated German engineering capabilities, but also created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit systematically. Allied designers focused deliberately on robust solutions that functioned reliably under imperfect conditions, with imperfect operators using imperfect materials in imperfect environments. This approach produced less impressive individual systems, but achieved superior overall performance through consistent reliability and operational effectiveness across large numbers of units. The philosophical divide between these approaches extended throughout every aspect of the war effort and revealed fundamental differences in strategic thinking about industrial warfare. German strategy assumed that superior individual technology could overcome numerical disadvantages and resource constraints. Allied strategy assumed that reliable technology deployed in large quantities would eventually overwhelm sophisticated technology available in limited quantities. German synthetic fuel production exemplified the same pattern. German chemical engineers developed processes that yielded high-quality gasoline using catalyst systems, precise temperature controls, and expert operators. When Allied bombing disrupted supply chains or killed skilled workers, entire facilities became useless. Allied fuel production relied on simpler refining techniques that were less efficient, but more robust. These systems could operate with substitute materials and inexperienced workers. When facilities were damaged, they could be quickly repaired. Simplicity became a strategic advantage. German aircraft manufacturing emphasized precision assembly and advanced materials that produced superior aircraft. This required highly skilled workers, perfect factory conditions, and complex supply chains. When any element failed, production collapsed. Allied aircraft manufacturing used simplified assembly and common materials, enabling mass production by workers with minimal training. Factories could be rapidly converted from automobile production. When specialized components were unavailable, engineers designed workarounds using available alternatives. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Germany could not afford to build systems requiring ideal conditions and expert operators because Germany increasingly lacked both. By 1945, German factories were staffed by forced laborers, teenagers, and elderly workers. Military units were filled with hastily trained recruits and foreign volunteers. Allied systems succeeded because they were designed for chaotic reality rather than theoretical perfection. Engineers anticipated that operators would be exhausted and poorly trained. They assumed maintenance would be performed under combat conditions with inadequate tools. They expected supply disruptions and planned accordingly. The story of U-1206 reveals why Germany lost World War II, compressed into a single catastrophic incident that perfectly illustrates the broader strategic failure. German engineering brilliance created a toilet so sophisticated that it required specialized training to operate safely under normal conditions. Allied engineering pragmatism created toilets so simple that any sailor could use them reliably under any conceivable conditions. When sophisticated technology confronted simple technology in the crucible of total war, simplicity triumphed decisively and comprehensively. Complex systems failed at critical moments when perfect operation was most essential. Simple systems continued functioning despite damage, neglect, operator error, and deliberate sabotage. The side with more reliable equipment consistently outlasted the side with superior equipment that worked only under perfect circumstances. The lesson was demonstrated repeatedly across every theatre of operations and every category of military equipment. Complex German tanks were defeated by simple Allied tanks that could be produced faster, maintained easier, and operated by ordinary soldiers. Sophisticated German aircraft were overwhelmed by reliable Allied aircraft that flew more missions with less maintenance. Advanced German submarines were sunk by basic Allied escort vessels using proven tactics and standard equipment. Every German submarine that survived the war had its complex toilet system replaced with simple septic tanks during post-war refitting and modernization programs. Every subsequent German submarine design deliberately abandoned precision engineering in favor of robust reliability as the primary design criterion. The lesson was literally written in the wreckage scattered across the floor of the North Sea. In warfare, the system that works consistently beats the system that works perfectly, but occasionally. Modern submarine designers throughout the world study the U-1206 incident as essential education in engineering philosophy and military technology development. The incident has become a standard case study used in engineering schools, military academies, and defense contractor training programs to illustrate fundamental principles of reliable system design. Contemporary submarines feature deliberately redundant systems, simplified controls, and fail-safe mechanisms specifically designed to prevent catastrophic failures from simple operator errors. Multiple backup systems ensure that no single component failure can doom the entire vessel. Critical systems are designed to fail gracefully rather than catastrophically. The tragedy of U-1206 was that it carried the instruments of its own destruction within its greatest technological achievements. German engineers had created solutions so sophisticated that they became self-defeating under real-world operating conditions. The pursuit of theoretical perfection had produced a practical system that was perfectly designed to fail under imperfect conditions. The Submarine Service Memorial in Kiel contains the names of approximately 30,000 German submariners who died during World War II, representing 3/4 of all personnel who served in the submarine force. Among those commemorated names are Hans Berghauer, Karl Koren, and Emil Kupper, the 3 men who drowned while abandoning U-1206 after the toilet catastrophe. Their memorial plaques provide no indication that they died because their submarine was destroyed by its own sophisticated toilet system rather than enemy action. Their sacrifice serves as an eternal reminder that in warfare, complexity becomes the enemy of survival when that complexity cannot be reliably operated by ordinary people under extraordinary stress. The most sophisticated technology becomes worthless if it cannot be operated reliably by typical personnel under realistic conditions. Engineering elegance means nothing if it cannot withstand the chaos, confusion, and imperfection that characterize actual combat operations. Technical superiority is meaningless if it creates more problems than it solves. Captain Schlit's toilet disaster occurred just 24 days before the end of the European War, when German submarine construction had virtually ceased. The Luftwaffe was grounded for lack of fuel, and Allied armies were racing toward Berlin from multiple directions. The sophisticated toilet that destroyed the submarine had been installed on a vessel that was already fighting a war that technology alone could never win. The final irony was profound and complete. U-1206's advanced toilet system had been specifically designed to save space and weight by eliminating traditional septic tanks, theoretically allowing the submarine to carry additional weapons and extend operational endurance. German engineers had calculated that removing conventional waste storage systems would provide room for 2 extra torpedoes and reduce surfacing requirements. But U-1206 never fired a single shot in anger against enemy targets. Its sophisticated toilet destroyed the submarine before its weapons could engage any Allied vessel. The most advanced waste management system in the world had prevented the submarine from fulfilling its basic military mission. German engineering had created a solution that was mathematically perfect and operationally catastrophic. The system worked flawlessly on paper and in laboratory testing, but failed completely in practical application under real-world conditions. The pursuit of theoretical elegance had produced practical disaster. The most advanced technology had become the most effective method of self-destruction. Engineering sophistication had defeated military effectiveness. The story resonates across decades because it captures the essence of industrial warfare in a single tragic incident. When U-1206's toilet flooded the submarine, it demonstrated that total war inevitably favors the side with simpler, more reliable systems over the side with sophisticated, fragile systems that require perfect conditions to function properly. German submarines were technological marvels that required perfect crews, perfect maintenance, perfect operating conditions, and perfect support systems. Allied submarines were practical tools designed to function adequately with imperfect crews, improvised maintenance, chaotic operating environments, and disrupted support systems. They were individually less impressive, but collectively far more effective in sustained combat operations. Reliability consistently trumped sophistication when lives depended on equipment performance under stress. Simple systems that worked consistently outperformed complex systems that worked perfectly but infrequently. Practical solutions outlasted theoretical solutions when subjected to the grinding attrition of industrial warfare. The Battle of the Atlantic was ultimately decided not by submarine technology or tactical brilliance, but by industrial capacity and engineering philosophy applied systematically across thousands of vessels and millions of personnel. Germany constructed 1,162 submarines during the war and lost 785 of them to enemy action, representing a loss rate that no military organization could sustain indefinitely. The United States built escort vessels, patrol aircraft, and detection equipment faster than Germany could replace submarine losses. More critically, Allied equipment was consistently designed to be operated by ordinary sailors under combat conditions, while German equipment increasingly required specialists who became rare as casualties mounted, and training programs were abbreviated. The side with equipment that worked reliably under any conditions systematically outlasted the side with superior equipment that worked perfectly only under ideal circumstances. When ideal circumstances became impossible to maintain, superior technology became inferior performance. Sophistication without reliability became elaborate failure. U-1206 rests on the North Sea floor as a monument to the limits of technological sophistication without corresponding attention to practical reliability. Its complex toilet system, precision periscopes, and advanced engines are gradually surrendering to the sea, corroding and collapsing as time and saltwater overcome even the finest German engineering. The simple septic tanks used by Allied submarines proved more durable than German engineering elegance in the ultimate test of time and service. Basic systems that worked consistently outlasted sophisticated systems that worked perfectly but briefly. Practical solutions survived, while theoretical solutions failed. In the end, World War II was won by practical solutions to practical problems, not sophisticated answers to theoretical challenges. The submarine that was destroyed by its own toilet serves as history's ultimate reminder that in warfare, consistent reliability triumphs over occasional perfection every time. Simple systems that work beat complex systems that don't. The lesson extends far beyond military applications into any high-stress environment where failure carries serious consequences. In designing aircraft, medical equipment, space vehicles, nuclear power plants, or any critical system, the fundamental principle remains unchanged. The best solution is not the most sophisticated one, but the most reliable one. When lives depend on consistent performance under stress, simplicity becomes the highest form of sophistication. Elegance without reliability is merely elaborate failure waiting to happen. The toilet that sank U-1206 teaches us that true engineering excellence lies not in creating complex solutions that work perfectly, but in creating simple solutions that work consistently when perfection is impossible. Modern engineers study the U-1206 incident as essential education in design philosophy. The submarine case appears in universities worldwide, not as mockery of German engineering, but as illustration of how optimization can become self-defeating. The aerospace industry embraced these lessons with measured enthusiasm. Aircraft design now balances sophistication with redundancy, multiple simple backup systems rather than single advanced primary systems. NASA learned that space missions couldn't afford elegant solutions that failed catastrophically. The medical device industry similarly adapted, though the stakes make conservatism essential. Modern surgical equipment prioritizes reliability over theoretical advancement when patient lives hang in the balance. Nuclear power plants use passive safety mechanisms that work without human intervention. Yet the tension remains. Every engineer faces the same dilemma Schlit faced: when to trust complexity, when to embrace simplicity. The U-1206 reminds us that the most sophisticated solution isn't always the smartest one, especially when lives depend on it working every time. From the depths of the North Sea, U-1206 continues teaching that true engineering excellence lies not in creating perfect systems for perfect conditions, but in creating reliable systems that work when perfection proves impossible. The submarine destroyed by its own toilet serves as history's reminder that in critical applications, consistent reliability beats occasional perfection.